So we'll be looking at that psalm that Malcolm kindly read for us. If you've got a church Bible, there's the blue church Bible in front of you, hopefully. It's on page 622. If you haven't got a Bible and like one, just wave your hand and someone can bring one down for you. So we're looking at a series on, you see the headings of the psalm, says a song of ascents, and we're doing a series looking through the song of ascents. And this is the next one we're looking to, and I hope we'll see that it's actually quite relevant to what we're thinking about this evening. So it's holiday season. Had your holidays? Some of you had your holidays, some of you still waiting for them. Well, they're always the same, aren't you? As you prepare to go off, there's that sense of excitement and anticipation. You get up ridiculously early in the morning, chase off, sit in the queues, finally arrive at your holiday destination. You look round, you explore the immediate area. Kind of, wow, look at that view. As long as it's not the UK and it's not raining, that's the course. And the sense in which some of those feelings are mirrored here in this psalm, except that it's not a holiday, it's a pilgrimage. And so you see in verse 1, they're setting off saying, I rejoiced with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. There's that excitement and anticipation. And then in verse 2, they've arrived where they say, our feet are standing in your gates, O Jerusalem. So we've been looking through the songs of ascent. And it's the third one that we've looked at, and we've said each time that these were traditionally sung by the Jewish pilgrims as they went up to Jerusalem to worship. So they went up to 3 national festivals. There was Passover, which is our Easter. They went at Pentecost, which is our Whitsun, and then went at Tabernacles, which is sort of September, October time. So this is the third of the Song of Ascents. We looked at Psalm 120, where we said that the psalmist was longing for something better in a broken world. We saw how the psalmist longed for peace. He was desperate for peace in a fallen and a broken world. He wanted to know God's peace. And yet instead he tells us that he felt distress. He says, I called to the Lord in my distress. And we saw how in a sense that longing was the start of a pilgrimage. As the pilgrimage begins, so what we saw was in very poetic language. He describes this sense of being afar off, that sense of wanting to know more of God's peace, to leave behind the brokenness of life, both his own inner brokenness and the effects that he sees all around, the effects of sin all around him. And he wants to journey to a better place. And then we looked at Psalm 121, where we saw the dangers of the pilgrimage, but a trust through it all in a sovereign protector. And we saw the challenge that the psalmist has for us in the pilgrimage that is life, to lift our eyes beyond our problems, to lift our eyes beyond our circumstance, as he did in the Psalm 121 when he says, I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And we saw how personal the psalm is, and how if you're a Christian, you can see that it encourages that every day, every week, every month, every year, God watches over us personally and is with us every step of the way. So Psalm 122, they've now arrived in Jerusalem. I rejoiced with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing in your gates, O Jerusalem. And as we look at this evening, it's probably just worth pausing a bit to have a look at a little bit of the historical context to it. It's important to notice that the Old Testament is history. As you read it, it describes things that really happened. The traditions really were there. And sometimes when you understand that, it can just help unpack what you're reading. Because otherwise you read it and you kind of understand the words, but you kind of don't, and it sort of passes over you, as it were. So verse 1 tells us they were going to the house of the Lord. It's important to realise that is not the same as going to church. I suspect a lot of you who have been in Christian circles will have heard it quoted that way. You've possibly heard sermons that way or read articles that way. But this was a pilgrimage, and the house of the Lord was the temple. It was a place of sacrifice. It was a place filled with rituals and symbols that were pictures and representations of what God would ultimately do through Jesus. So in verse 2 and 3, they've come to Jerusalem. It's like arriving at your holiday destination, except this is the pilgrimage. They've come to Jerusalem. They're looking round Jerusalem, is what they describe. And just with the temple, so Jerusalem was a place packed with significance and pictures of what was to come. So in picture language, Jerusalem was the place where God chose to dwell. It was his throne, as it were, particularly through the temple. They weren't going to Jerusalem for a holiday. They weren't going there as an all expenses paid jolly. They were going to a place where God promised he would meet with them. And so in the second half of verse 4, they say they went there to praise the name of the Lord according to the statute given to Israel. They're going to praise God. God is at the centre of what they're all about. Verse 3, there's some slight ambiguity in the translation and how it should be taken, but the sense appears to be that they're in Jerusalem and they're looking around at the physical city. This isn't an ethereal experience. This is something very physical and very real. And then in verse 4, it talks about the tribes going up. It says that's where the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, to praise the name of the Lord. So society at the time was organised in terms of tribes. And the sense of these verses of belonging to something bigger than just yourself. And literally hundreds of thousands of people were descended upon Jerusalem, have thronged the streets. It's been quite an amazing spectacle just to be there with all those huge numbers of people and being part of what was happening. This wasn't an individual experience where you found out about the real you. This was something where you belonged to a tribe. You were part of something bigger. You had a place. You belonged in terms of what was going on. Verse 5 then talks about thrones standing for judgment. And what's that all about? Well, part of what this is about, the David it talks about, is the king of the time, and his house were the kings that followed him. And probably the sort of nearest equivalent we have is something like the Supreme Court. So when you went up, you had a grievance, you had an unresolved problem that you couldn't get justice. You could get justice there by bringing it to the king himself and his staff for a decision. You had access to justice at the various highest level. Your case could be heard, wrongs could be righted, justice could be obtained as part of what was going on. And then finally in verses 6 and 9, it talks about peace. And we saw that when we looked at Psalm 120, when we said that this word that's here translated as peace is one of those big Bible words, shalom. Not just the absence of war, but the idea of wholeness and completeness and things being as they should be. Harmony, true peace both inwardly and peace outwardly. So what does Psalm say to you and to me this evening? What are our take-home messages from it? I want to see three very simple things. I want to see firstly from this purpose and destiny. The second thing I want to see is place and belonging. And thirdly, I want to see peace and wholeness. So firstly, purpose and destiny. I rejoiced with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing in your gates, O Jerusalem. We've said before when we looked at Songs of Ascent that you often see pilgrimages on the telly. Maybe you watch them, maybe you've heard about them. But it's all about the spiritual journey. It's all about discovery along the way. You set out with a few others maybe, some with a faith, some with no faith. And along the way, you find out about yourself and you connect with the real spiritual new. And you find new understanding and new meaning through a shared experience as you journey together. Well, that's fine, and I'm sure it's great for those who take part. And I'm not trying to knock anybody or criticize anyone. But that's not what this psalm is about. It's not about the journey. It's about purpose and destiny. You're heading somewhere. You're going somewhere specific for a specific reason. You see, in the modern world, in a sense, the destiny is irrelevant. What matters is the journey. It's my experience of self-discovery that counts. But here, the destination is everything, and the destination creates the purpose. So he says, I rejoiced with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. There's purpose, there's destiny. They're heading somewhere, and they're heading somewhere with a purpose. They say, our feet are standing in your gates, O Jerusalem. They've arrived at the destination. That was what it was all about. It's picture language, but it's significant. The house of the Lord that they rejoiced to go to was the temple, where sacrifices were made, where the worshipper was put right with God. Jerusalem was the place where God chose to dwell. And it's a destination where God takes centre stage. So it says the tribes go up to praise the name of the Lord in verse 4. God is taking centre stage in what they're doing. It's not about me, it's about him. And for you and for me, the pilgrimage that is life needs purpose and it needs destiny. Purpose and destiny. Without it, life is ultimately pointless and meaningless. And as you grow older and as it feels as if the sand is sinking through that hourglass, you look at life and you start to ask those questions. What's the point of life? Where is it heading? Where is the destiny? This evening I can tell you that Annette has arrived at her destination. She's completed her spiritual pilgrimage. Like the worshippers in Psalm 122, she can say, our feet are standing in your gates, O Jerusalem. She's looking round in the heavenly Jerusalem, rejoicing that she is there. And I can tell you confidently this evening, she's not wearing a white nightie. She's not sitting on a cloud, and she might have a heart, but I don't think she has. But just as the worshippers here looked round at a very real and physical city, so she is in a very real and a very physical place. She has arrived at her destination. If you're not a Christian here this evening, what are you living for? Where are you heading? What do you make of that big full stop that there is at the end of life? Is it your great hope that when you get there, when your turn comes, there'll be nothing there? Is that it? Is that all you've got to hope for? And if you are a Christian this evening, let me ask you, where are you looking this evening? What is your hope this evening? We may smile when we talk about the people on a pilgrimage, thinking about the journey rather than the destination. But actually, even as Christians, sometimes we have that same attitude. Sometimes we're looking at our circumstances, it's eyes down, wishing the journey was easier, wishing the journey could be a bit more fulfilling. We need to lift our eyes, as the psalmist tells us to do in the previous psalm, when it says, I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And we need to put our circumstances into God's hand. And as they lifted their eyes, as they physically ascended up to the mountains of Jerusalem, so we need to lift our eyes to the destiny that beckons to us. One of our modern songs puts it like this: there is a hope that burns within my heart, that gives me strength for every passing day. A glimpse of glory now revealed in meagre part, yet drives all doubt away. I stand in Christ with sins forgiven, and Christ in me the hope of heaven, my highest calling and my deepest joy, to make his will my home. Is that your hope this evening? Are you living with purpose and with destiny? But the second thing I see in this psalm is place and belonging. Place and belonging. It says Jerusalem is built like a city that is closely compacted together. That is where the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, to praise the name of the Lord according to the statute given to Israel. Well, you said about the tribes, said you didn't just go up there as an individual. You were obviously an individual, but you were part of something bigger. You had your place, you belonged, you knew that it was right for you to be there. There's no sense as you read this of arriving in Jerusalem and seeing someone there who says, oh, it's you. What on earth have you come here for? There's no sense of arriving and finding it's all cliques and somehow you don't fit in. There's no sense of being lonely in a crowd. Amongst those throngs of thousands upon thousands of worshippers, you had your tribe, you had your place, you were welcomed as part of what was going on. Society today is very individualistic. It's all about me and my family and my close to me. And in a sense, that's perfectly right and good. But even in today's society, people want to find something. They want to be part of something that's bigger than just themselves. I'm no social expert, but I've heard it said that even gang culture is partly attractive because you belong to something. You gain security and identity by part of being a gang. Well, let me tell you, when you become a Christian, you immediately sense that you belong to something that is bigger than yourself. You're put right with God first and foremost. It's me right with God. That's the first thing. That's the most important thing. But there's an immediate connection with other Christians who've done the same thing. Right with God, right with others. You realize that you now belong. And I remember as in my younger days as a student, when I became a Christian, it was one of the first things that just flooded me, that I belonged. I had an affinity with these people called Christians that I never understood before. David and Annette used to love to come here on a Sunday, not because of the building, not because of the ritual, but because they knew they had a spiritual family here. And they used to love to be here, to sing God's praise with their spiritual family. Place and belonging. A foretaste now, but what is to come? The psalm speaks of the end of a spiritual pilgrimage, and it tells us what we can expect. Annette was a very shy person. You didn't go into the coffee room after church and find her at the centre of the conversation. You didn't sort of, walk out and hear her cackle of laughter as you went. She was very shy. And I suspect the thought of being amongst these throngs of worshippers that are pictured here would have filled her with a sense of dread. But I can tell you that as she stepped into eternity, she will have known that this is home. She will have known that that's where she has a place. She will have known that that is where she belongs. And it's the same for you if you're a Christian. Purpose and destiny, place and belonging, but thirdly, there's peace and wholeness. It says, there stand the thrones for judgment, the thrones of the house of David. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. May there be peace within your walls and security within your citadels. For the sake of my family and friends, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord our God, I will seek your prosperity. So we looked at this when we looked at Psalm 120. When we looked at this word peace or shalom, and we said then it was one of those big Bible words that's full of meaning, that's very difficult to translate with a single word. We said it originally came from the idea of making restitution. So restitution, not a word we use much today, but if you committed a crime such as theft, restitution meant you didn't just pay back what you'd taken, but you had to pay it back several times over to make right the wrong that you had committed. And so peace or shalom had the idea of something put right or put complete. It's true peace. It's things as they should be. True harmony where wrongs have been put right, not just outwardly, but an inner wholeness, an inner completeness, a sense in where all this turmoil has been put right. I'm right with God, I'm right with myself, I'm right with others. It's about true inner peace with yourself. It's about true peace outwardly with others. And you can see how that's linked to this idea of thrones for judgment. Because there can't be true peace if there's injustice, if there's wrongs being committed, if there's wrongs being swept under the carpet and ignored. There can't be that true shalom peace. But here, the king himself puts wrongs right so that there can be true peace. The prayers of verses 6 to 9 are clearly important. Here's a place where peace is clearly prized, a place that is never fully realised in this life. We only ever get a foretaste. As you trust in Christ, you get a foretaste of that peace. Peace with God, peace with myself. And yet, as we saw in Psalm 120, in the midst of that, so often we're struggling for peace. We're not really feeling it's as it should be. But it's a foretaste, a picture of what is to come. A place of wholeness where everything has been put right. A place there are no more frustrations and things that don't work as they should, where everything is as it should be. No more regrets or hurts or tears. No more bodies that wear out and let us down and become a burden. A place of justice where wrongs have been put right by the King of Kings himself. No more inner anxiety and turmoil. A place of true peace, a place of God's shalom. Annette had many sadnesses to deal with in life. But she's in a place now where she's found everything has been put right, where there is true peace, where we're told in the Bible that the King of Kings, God himself, will have wiped away every tear from her eyes. The song we quoted from earlier goes on to say, there is a hope that stands the test of time, that lifts my eyes beyond the beckoning grave, to see the matchless beauty of a day divine when I behold his face. When suffering cease and sorrows die, and every longing satisfied, then joy unspeakable will flood my soul, for I am truly home. Purpose and destiny, place and belonging, peace and wholeness. How can I make these things mine this evening? How can I know that this is my destiny, that I'm going to that place? Well, the first verse tells us that they were going to the temple. They were deliberately going to the temple. That was why they went. It was a place where the worshipper would take an unblemished lamb, where that lamb would be killed, its blood would be poured out, its hide would be taken off, the body would be burnt up as an offering on behalf of the worshipper. A brutal picture. The lesson is that the price must be paid. Someone has to die in my place. And the temple and the sacrifices that were made there looked forward to what Jesus would do when he was taken and when he was hung on a cruel Roman cross. Because as he hung there, so he paid the price for sin, for your sin and for mine, so that we could find forgiveness and we could find that true peace with God, made with God and with others. As the old children hymn puts it, there was no other good enough to pay the price of sin. He only could unlock the gate of heaven and let us in. You have to trust in what Jesus did to forgive your sin and put you right with God. David was telling me the other day how he and Annette had been brought up as churchgoers. He'd been brought up going to Sunday school. David said in his early married life, he was enjoying life, but God was missing. And he said it was when tragedy struck in the family that he and Annette realised that Jesus was for real, and he said he put his trust personally and individually in what Jesus did at the cross. Will you do that this evening? Will you trust in Jesus for yourself? If you do, you'll find purpose and destiny. You'll find place and belonging. You'll find peace and wholeness. A foretaste now, the best yet to come.